Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Gerard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air Global Network with more than 4 million listeners. I'm your host, Danielle Gerard, and today's guest is Karen Rose. Karen is the award-winning #1 international best-selling author of more than 25 novels, including the best-selling Baltimore and Cincinnati series. She has been translated into 23 languages, and her books have been on the New York Times, the Sunday Times in the UK, and the Germany's, I'm going to mess that up, Der Spiegel bestsellers
Spiegel.
list. Der Spiegel. Thank you.
Spiegel.
We'll see, my German is not going to pass today's test, but a lot of bestsellers list, and one of them is in Germany. Thank you for joining us and welcome, Karen.
Good morning and thank you.
So this, Karen's latest book, Cold-Blooded Liar, is a thrill. I was up, if you can see some bags under my eyes, too late, a couple of nights to finish this off, and it's fabulous. So please, Karen, tell our listeners about Cold-Blooded Liar.
Okay, well, normally the way, and because it's a little bit of a departure on my normal writing, and I will continue doing this, but I have for the last 20 years, and that my 20th anniversary is coming up this summer for my first book.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I was like, wow, 20
I
years.
know. But how's that possible when you were still 30? I don't understand.
Oh, but the way I've normally put together books is there's a community of either family, friends, coworkers in a particular city, and I kind of go through all their stories, and then I move on to the next city. And right now, for example, I'm doing a series in New Orleans. So promo paperback just came out last week.
Beautiful.
Midnight, okay. And this is book 1 of my New Orleans series, and that will continue. But I have gotten more productive, largely because I haven't traveled anywhere in the last couple of years.
Nobody has, right?
Who knew I could be more productive? So I thought, I really want to try something different in addition to what I do. So this is all incremental. So if you've loved the books that are set around families and in certain cities, that's not going to stop. It's going to keep on going. This is extra.
Yes.
And so this is a series, and it's set in sunny San Diego. And the way that the first way that it's different is that the two characters, Kit and Sam. Kit is a homicide detective. Sam is a criminal psychologist. They will be the characters in every book. So it's going to be like an ongoing series with them. So there's romance, a lot, death, of course, and all of the mystery around that. But the romance is more of a slow burn, because we're going to get many, many books, to kind of work our way up to that. And I really hope that you like it. But again, we're going to have this series, and we're going to continue to have the city-oriented series.
Right, because people love your Baltimore and your Cincinnati series. So they will be happy to know you're doing that. You're continuing that with New Orleans. But let's talk about this departure, because I'm happy to hear that there's romance, because I'm really rooting for these two. At the end of the book, I'm like, okay, wait, where's the next part? When do I get to read more? So tell us the setup of the book, if you will, because it's really it's fascinating and so clever and really compulsive.
So Kit is a homicide detective, and she comes from a large foster family that factor into all of the stories. And I really fell in love with her foster parents, Harlan and Betsy McKittrick. They're great people. And just real quickly, Kit's origin story is the prologue, so it's not a big giveaway, but her choice to become a detective stems from the murder of one of her foster sisters, who she considered to be her real sister, even though they shared no blood, when they were 15 years old. And so this homicide career has been basically all she's ever wanted to do. So she's exactly in the place where she wants to be, but she's a bit of an overachiever, of course, and she works really hard. And she's that's going to be, again, part of her growth is balance, is we're all looking for. Sam is a psychologist, and most people know the difference between psychiatrists and psychologists. The primary one is that psychiatrists go to med school and can prescribe medication. Psychologists are more in the talking therapy kind of work. But another difference is psychologists aren't protected by client confidentiality, patient confidentiality, but they can be asked in court to divulge things that they've heard in session, and they can't do it. Now, my husband was he was a mental health therapist studying to be a psychologist way back in the day. This was my early writing days when I was writing all by myself and nobody knew. And times
we all have those, right? Yeah.
Or my other life. And there were times when he would go to court and would be asked, share this or share that, and you have to say, I can't do that. He could lose his license, or he could be held liable in civil court so they're not given the same protections. So I thought, what if somebody came to a psychologist and said, I committed a murder? What would happen? Well, what happens is the psychologist can't tell anyone. They cannot tell anyone unless there's a clear and present danger to a living person, or if juveniles are involved. That's another kind of not a loophole, but a requirement. And so, I'm like, okay, so what if you had this really good person, Sam? Sam is a really good person.
Oh my God. I love Sam. I want to date Sam.
Sam is just like, he's a really good person.
Yeah.
He has this client who comes to him who's a pathological liar. Now, he's come to Sam for anger management because he's basically nearly put his neighbor in the hospital for challenging one of his bald-faced lies. And he doesn't know what to do, because all of a sudden, in the midst of this guy's lies, there are kernels of truth, and he doesn't know what's what. So what do I do? And he agonizes over that. And a lot of this is on the back cover copy, so I'm not divulging anything, but he makes an anonymous phone call, because he knows, he believes there's a murder, and he believes there's somebody else in danger. But again, he's having trouble separating truth from lies. But he figures if there's a dead body where he believes there's a murder,
right,
then he's like, okay, then the rest of this stuff is true, other than, I just had tea with the queen. And
right.
Now,
that guy's got some humdingers. He tells some real tales.
He does. And so, it's a conflict for him. And so how he resolves the conflict, how Kit takes him seriously and goes about solving this murder. They find out that there's a serial killer on the loose in San Diego. He's been operating for years, and
like 20 years.
Right. So Sam is they have to work together. They don't have to work together. They end up working together.
Sam gets kind of in trouble. Sam gets, because, of course, the police locate the person who made the phone call, and then, and so, which makes it so interesting is and I love this, of course, because it's such inherent conflict, is that they really have the same goal in mind, of course, but Kit, the detective, can't exactly trust. He very well, in her mind, could be the killer, right? So, anyway, but the other thing you do so beautifully is that the whole host of characters, it's Kit and her partner Baz, and they have worked together. He actually worked the case where her sister was killed, so he's been around a really long time, and he's her partner. And then the senior Navarro, and then the supporting cast around them, and the sort of people that come in. And then also on Sam's side, the attorney who he dated, and his best friend. There's so many, but it's what's so lovely about actually both Kit and Sam, and they're very different characters, of course, and yet they have this core trauma, both of them, right? Really, and this core sort of tenderheartedness in jobs where it's sort of important to be able to separate yourself from the situations which are so brutal and ugly, and yet then they do that, but sort of to a little to mixed success, right? which is, I think, so hard for them, but for a reader, it's so, because of course all of us would feel, we always think, I think it'd be the hardest job ever to be a police officer, because, you see these horrible things, and then you have to go home and look at your own family and think that kid that died was the same age as, I mean, that's just, it seems impossible. And you do such a beautiful job of, humanizing them and still making them, and Kit's no pushover. She's not like, these are strong people. So, and I love your strong women, including Sam's, boss, who's also, these are, so anyway, all the characters, I love your characters. And I think for me, the propulsion of the plot, which is so well done and so twisty turny, but also those characters, the combination of that just makes for such a satisfying read. So that is so fun. So, okay, so this is obviously book one. And I figured, I knew from the end that if you didn't write another book, I was going to show up at your door and be like, wait a minute, don't.
I just finished the second one. So,
Okay, that's exciting. So we will see that when?
In a year, March. So this
Okay.
one comes at the end of February. It'll be
Okay,
February
perfect.
2024. Oh my Lord.
I know
Yes.
that seems impossible. So tell me, so I was wondering, because those the sort of two main characters who, as you said, are Kit and Sam, and they both feel to me sort of very fully formed. Does one of them come to you first, and you sort of develop? So can you tell us about that, your process for that, and
Well, it's interesting. I have a group of writing friends, and I brainstorm with them. And I really had Sam's character fleshed out more at the beginning. I knew who Kit was. I knew she was a homicide detective. And so Sam's initial conflict is really the core of the story.
right?
And my husband was a mental health therapist, and he and I had been batting this idea back and forth on one of our many car rides. This was like a 10-hour car ride, and about halfway into it, I'm like, I have this idea. And so we talked about it, and he goes, well, this would have to happen and this would have to happen. And then I went off and researched the rest of it. But when I sat down to brainstorm plot ideas with my group, one of them said very quietly, well, what about Kit? What's she doing here? I was like, oh, I forgot about Kit. I'm like, well, she's and so then, Kit's, I kind of opened my mind, and then poof, it all kind of mushing in. And, and every so often, if you've written, a couple books, that sometimes they just flow like water.
Right.
And sometimes it's like, dental surgery.
Right. So true.
And this one flowed like water. It just, when I got started writing, it was just really a joy. And I knew I knew who the bad guy was. I knew how it was going to end, but I didn't know how it was going to happen. Mm-hmm. And so that was really a joy, just kind of getting through and was like, oh, that's how that works. Okay. So a lot of times you got stuff kicking around in your subconscious. You don't know how it's all going to come together. And even now I freak out, I'm like, oh no, what am I going to do now? I'm off my outline. And you just kind of have to trust your own brain sometimes.
So you do, and I also always know who the bad guy is. I feel like I think there are people out there who like write and try to figure it out in the way. And I think if I did that, I'd be like, everybody's bad, or nobody's bad. Right? I have no end. So you do outline. Talk about that, because of course there's so many different ways that we do this thing and create these books. So what is your process? You have an idea, and then how does it work?
Well, I've gotten myself into a pattern, and it works for me. I hate some people love the beginnings of books. I don't like the beginnings of books.
Interesting. Okay.
Well, there's just so many ways. I get anxiety at the beginning, looking at that blank page, and there's so many ways it could go. What if I pick the wrong way? And then I'm going to have to figure it all out, start all over again, which has happened to me 1.5 times, out of, almost 30 books. So, but it's a real fear. And so what I started to do was, then I would start with the character profiles, and I start with, I'm getting to the outline in a minute. I start with the hero, the heroine, the bad guy, who are they? What's their basic background? Who are their family, their friends, their coworkers? And I kind of build their little world. And as I'm building their world, the details of the story are starting to kind of come together in my head. So by the time I get to the end, I've already started telling the story within their character profiles.
Right.
And then I start writing, when I start writing the outline, the proposal, a lot of the beginning is already there. And so I used to really work hard at the proposal. And then I realized once I get the beginning and I get the end, the middle is going to change as I write. So I don't spend so much time on the middle of the outline anymore. I'll put in there, I know like a couple high points, if I know the high points, and then I'll say, and then a lot of people die and they
right.
love and have a happily ever after, and
Right.
Nobody has smacked me for that yet. So
No, I think that makes that. I mean, because I actually think it's a little unrealistic. I mean, unless you're somebody who outlines like to the, and I don't know how people would do that, but the middle is changed because the middle, as the people emerge on the page, you're like, oh, this person is actually got something interesting that we could pursue. And I think that's another thing that this book does really beautifully is that there's moments where almost a lot of those characters are momentarily suspicious, right? I mean, there's a lot of people in the book that I was like, ooh, could be that person, so I mean, I think because of when you have a well drawn and but big cast and you're trying to figure out sort of the motivation and also the fact that somebody's been at work for 20 years, it gives you kind of narrows down, as we know from statistics, serial killers are almost always male. And, so there's all these, and then this serial killer's been at work for 20 years, which means they have to be at least kind of 35. So it's all these, it's all these fun things to kind of help the reader guess. And that's I think why readers read suspense, right? We're in it to sort of as a game to kind of figure out if we can figure it out first, which I did not. I did not figure it out, but I know,
I'm
which is so
glad.
fun to, right? Yeah, exactly. And I'm pretty good at the game, but I did not figure it out. So but I
Can I
yeah.
interject something on that point?
Oh.
Because you said that aspiring writers were listening. When I first started writing, and this was way back in the 90s, and I wrote for myself, I wrote for fun because I was traveling and there weren't enough books. I couldn't fit enough books in my luggage and there were no ebooks back then. So I started writing. And eventually I got an agent, but that book was not a romantic suspense. It was more of a women's fiction with an element of suspense. And it was that agent back then, my very first agent, who said, you have a suspenseful voice. Have you ever considered writing suspense? And I was like, no, but I was an engineer. I'll see.
Oh, wow.
I'll try it. I'll see what it takes. And so what I did, because I'd watched a lot of Law and Order by that point, and I kind of had the pacing down. But the thing that I thought was, which thriller authors surprised me? Because like you, I'm good at the game. I could name a thriller in 2 scenes,
Right.
and it's a game. And I went back to, it was a Tammy Hogue book. And I said, well, she surprised. I got to the end and it was kind of like Sixth Sense, where it's like, couldn't have been him. He did. And then I went back and I looked and I was like, yeah, she just laid it out really well. And it was all there. And so what I did was I read her book backwards, chapter by chapter. I wanted to see how she was laying out the clues that I had so clearly missed, and why did I miss them? And what I realized was the clues were there in plain sight, but I was so engrossed in the story, I forgot to look. So it comes down to engrossing the reader, capturing your reader's attention with the characters, and they get so engrossed, so wrapped up in the characters and what's going to happen next, that they forget to look for the bad guy. And Michael Connelly is amazing at that.
Yes.
And when I started reading his books, I actually started listening to them on audio, and you can't go to the end of the book and see. You might be tempted, but you can't, because it's an audio book, and you just have to kind of listen as it goes. And I would get to the end and I'm like, oh yeah. And then he always has this little twist, at the end, where it's not
right.
really.
Right.
And
you think it's this, and then you're right. And then there's the final.
And then you find there's the final, but again, I was so engrossed in the character of Harry Bosch and basically mentally warning every woman away from Harry Bosch because, she's either going to die, she's going to go insane, or she's going to go to prison.
Right. Exactly.
But I forgot to look. And so again, capturing your reader's attention with the characters that they care about.
Yeah.
That they're real people and that they care about.
Well, I think it's a really good point. Like, two aspiring authors, and I actually, Tammy Hogue was one of my sort of first role models too. I do think she does an amazing job of putting things out there. And there's one moment in your book too where there's just one line, and when I thought back, I was like, oh, look at that right there, but a gloss over line, like, not something that anyone is going to go back to, but so cleverly done in hindsight, or in my hindsight. But I think that's an interesting thing. So you listen to it backwards. I sometimes would, when I early, learning to write, create sort of a spreadsheet of, like, the chapters of another author, and then kind of what the reveals were that led us to, as a way of sort of figuring out how, like you said, dissecting it. And I was in finance and you're an engineer, so our minds might sort of work a certain way to sort of pull something apart and understand it. But I do think that's hugely helpful, when you're trying to figure out how to make a book work.
Well, there's a couple things. I actually did get to meet Tammy Hogue once. This is many years ago. And I told her, we were standing like at a coffee station, and I told her this story, and she laughed. She goes, well, if you figure out how I did it, let me know, because I don't know.
I know, right?
She laughed.
Well, I think
one of the other things that I do that's kind of engineering, but think about, is when like I said, sometimes I get, well, every book, I get freaked out when I realize I'm off my original outline.
Yeah.
The book has taken me to a different place, but I know how I need it to end. So I know where I am. I'm supposed to be doing this, but now I'm down here and I still have to get,
Right.
So what I did the first time, and I think this was probably with book 5 or 6, just a cheap, 50-cent thing of Post-it notes. And I would write, they catch the killer. And I put it down. For that to happen, this has to happen. And so you're talking about pulling things apart. I kind of pulled it apart from the end, and then I worked my way back to where I got stuck. And then I've got a whole book, so then the last third of the book, I sit down and I write it until all the Post-it notes are done.
I love that. And so when it's a sort of general Post-it note, but because all you need is sort of the kernel of the scene, right? What has to happen in that one scene, what piece of evidence they have to discover, and the rest of it just comes as you're working, right? You're not going to prescribe yourself, this is the way that has to happen, because then you sort of tamp the flow of it, and that makes so much sense to me. Now, now that you're writing, sounds like 2 books a year, how do you structure your, I mean, and of course we all know that when you're right now, you're about to do, all the exciting, pub day launch and interviews and all that stuff for this fabulous book, but you're also writing, I'm sure, one more book and maybe a second book. So how do you sort of structure your days? Do you write certain times? How does that work?
I write at night.
Interesting.
I think better when it's dark, and I have more energy when it's dark. I have a physical disability that heat and sunshine just make me super tired.
Got it.
It's not quite chronic fatigue, but as I get older, so for me, when the sun goes down, then it's time, that's when it's time to go to work. So I do a lot of the interviews and things like that during my daytime hours. And then, I might start work depending on when it gets dark, the really long nights, again, the winter when the nights are longer, I get a whole lot more done. But yeah, I had never written this quickly before. So now I'm faced with, okay, so now you've got to write the book, and then the book you wrote, you have to revise. And then the book you wrote before that it comes back for page proofs, so for the proofreading. And so you're constantly juggling, okay, now which book is this?
Right.
And, so it's it requires, it has been requiring more mental partitioning of my time. Can't just kind of flow into it. But normally what I'll do is, I can write a book pretty quickly when I get started. I think I wrote Cold-Blooded Liar in about 4 weeks.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That is so impressive. So when you say you work when it gets dark, you start at whatever, now it's dark at like 5:30, and then you work until in the middle of the night?
Yeah, sometimes I'll start at 10, that's kind of that 5:30 to 10 time is I spend that with my husband.
Yeah.
We're both night owls. So, but I'm more of a night owl. So he might, head to bed 2 or 3 in the morning and I'm up until dawn. And then I tiptoe into bed and, it's like,
That is so
God,
this is like I've done like 50 interviews, Karen, and you're the first person to tell me that you're the vampire writer. You just
I am the
you're doing
vampire
it.
right now.
All right.
Joke
That's
about that at home. I don't like sunlight. I don't like garlic.
that is so funny. That is wow. Okay. So interesting. And your brain works better. And also it's quiet. Or you're probably not getting a lot of emails at that time. Nobody's calling you, right? It tends to be kind of a sacred time. Do you have do you sort of set yourself up is there a specific space? Do you like candles? How does that work?
Well, not candles, because I would forget about them and set my house on fire. So there are certain
Fair.
things I'm not allowed to do because I'm
Fair.
very distractible. I'm not allowed to make popcorn in the microwave.
That's hilarious.
Do 16 things when the 2 minutes is popping. And then there's a disaster. The house smells like burned popcorn for 3 days. So
Right.
I'm forbidden from popping. Martin's like, if you want it, I will make it for you. Otherwise,
I love that.
have this bag of pre-popped popcorn.
I love that.
Oh, now I've forgotten your question because I went off on a tangent.
You said no candles, but you said you have a setup of how you
candles. I
no
have, what I
candles.
think is music. I can't
Interesting.
write anywhere. I have a friend, a male friend, and I'm not sure if this is having been through, menopause thing or not, but I can't do what he can do. He can, and I used to be able to. He can sit down in a living room filled with people, all having conversations, and immediately drop down and start writing.
Uh-huh.
I watched him do it, and I'm like, "Are you writing right now?" And he was like,
Yeah.
I'm like, "Oh, I'm so jealous." When I was younger, I used to be able to sit in an airport and I could write literally anywhere.
Right.
As I get older, and again, you're dealing with your own body that sometimes you hate you, and
right.
you're like, okay, so now I have to get a more structured routine. I can't just drop into it. So I use music, and unfortunately for anyone who is within listening, I try to do this either while I'm way by myself or use headphones, but I'll find a song that has a certain cadence. For this book, for the one I just finished, for Quarter to Midnight, I think it was Rainbow Connection. It only made my daughter angry because I would listen to Rainbow Connection over and over and over again, and it then becomes just background noise. But it's like, you used Kermit to kill people.
Yeah.
And like, I totally did. For the one I just finished, it was Goodbye Girl by David Gates, and it just has like it's just kind of, and I'll listen and listen and listen, and then you condition your mind. So once I hear that music, oh, now I'm ready to work.
That is so interesting. The same song.
The same song. Yeah. Yeah. So my Spotify year in review is always really interesting. You listen to these 3 songs over and over again.
Right. 10,000 times. That's so interesting. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, and so when you're writing, once you kind of know where you're going, I know you're fleshing out the characters and sort of that's building your beginning. Are you somebody who sort of, are you writing, you're not letting yourself edit until sort of later, or do you pick up the next day and kind of reread what you've written? What works for you in terms of that process?
Okay, so I've tried a lot of different ways. The way I'm currently doing it, and I do edit as I go, but what I've started doing, and I've been doing this for probably about 5 years now, is just keeping like another page open. And for a long time, I did it in Word, and where I'm like, okay, this has to change. So I'd either make use track changes to say this has to change, or insert this as an earlier scene so to make this work. or if I forget something, so-and-so did something, and I just make
Mm-hmm.
a comment to myself. Now I use Scrivener.
Mm-hmm.
Still use the comments in Scrivener, but because it's all in one place, I can
Yeah.
keep that list of ongoing edits. So then I'll go back at the end and add all the edits in, unless, of course, I get to a point, and this doesn't happen, luckily, it doesn't happen very often, where you get to a point where like, oh no, I really messed up. I have to go back and change a bunch of stuff.
I have to fix it before I can go on, kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That has happened a couple times.
Yeah, and I have to imagine a lot of writers. I use Scrivener as well, and I have to imagine a lot of aspiring writers use Scrivener. But can you tell people about that? Like what what you like about it, why you chose it?
Well, first of all, I started using it out of desperation because my books are now Cold Blood Liar isn't as long, but my books are generally very long.
Yeah.
And when you get to a certain point in Word, it gets very buggy. And, for
Mm-hmm.
example, I think you get past 150,000 words and the grammar function turns off, which is fine because it's annoying anyways, because
Right.
people don't talk like that. Thank you very much. Go away. Or if
Right.
there's a word is very judgy. Some of your readers may object to this language. I'm like,
That is so interesting. You must have a more conservative version of Word. Mine's never told me that.
I knew one other author who said that
Or I
Word
shut it off.
Word is really judgy. Scrivener is not judgy. And it's
No.
also very stable. I've never had it crash on me, but Word would crash. And after losing your day's work a couple of times, you're just like, I'm done with this. And I do save often, but I write fast. When I'm in the zone, I write fast and I'm not remembering to save, every 10
Right.
minutes. And sometimes it wouldn't auto save, and I'm like, where did all this stuff go? And
Yeah.
Scrivener has never crashed on me, so I used it out of desperation at the beginning, but then I really started liking how I could keep the notes. So like there's a whole area for notes.
Hmm.
It's really no different from Word in that, other than you can keep everything in one place. It's just a more organized
Yeah.
file. So before Scrivener, I had like, I don't know, 20, 30 different Word things, like, oh, this was this interview, this was that interview, these were all the things I need to fix. These are the people in the story, these are the places in the story. With
Right.
Scrivener, I can keep it all in and these are the people I've killed in this story.
Right.
And when you have a high body count, you got to keep track of all of that stuff. So the Scrivener has an area for notes, and and I'll have, I have a doctor friend who helps me with all the medical stuff in my book.
Sure.
Interview with him on this date. I have a cop friend, interview with her on this date.
Right.
And I can keep all of that in one place. I can keep that stuff. I call it stuff to add. It's like very descriptive stuff to add all in one place. I keep track of who drives what car, because sometimes that's important, in a clue. And who
Right.
lives
Which it was
there.
in this book for sure. Yeah.
If you've got to keep track of where everything happens, so how long
Right.
it takes to get from A to B, and what's a reasonable, the way to pace the scene. I like Scrivener because you can keep it all in one place, and I started writing each file as a scene.
Yeah, I do that too. And I love that too, because then you can, if you literally drag and drop, right? If you're like, that scene belongs before, instead of the cut and paste function and trying to figure out if you actually did that correctly in Word, you just pull it up and move it around. And I love the research function because you can actually grab a website and just drag the website right into the sort of research, and you just, and then you can click on it and you can go right back.
I don't
You
use
know,
that. I need to start using that,
it's
because I
so
keep it in
lovely.
a file folder on my browser, and I like your way better.
Yeah, and it's nice because all you do is pick that little the little icon at the left hand side of the website and drag it right into research. And so I do something like where I always try to, I use a list of fallen soldiers from Afghanistan and Iraq to find character names, because it's such a it's such a, there's so many different types of names in those lists, of course. And I just put that right in the research, so I can click on it and search through the pages of names when I'm looking for a different new character name, because otherwise my character names, I'm like John, Mary, like I just can never think of a new name. But that is really useful too. It has a lot of really good functions, and it compiles easily. If you want to
Yes.
make a Word document out of it, it's really super friendly. So so you were an engineer, so you were writing and working full time.
Well, for fun. I wrote and worked, well, I was an engineer and I traveled a lot
Yeah.
internationally, and there was no television because it was all in different languages that I didn't speak. And I told the story once to a library in South Africa, and the lady on the front row said, I would have just gone to the bar, which never even occurred to me because I'm such a, I really, I'm anxious in lots, in big noisy groups of people make me anxious. I'm like, I would never have even considered that. So I'm stuck in my room and I'm writing, and it was for fun. And I think, looking back, I think that was a benefit to me because there was not the pressure on me that I see a lot of new writers have, because I did it for fun. Nobody was ever going to read it. It was just for me. It was kind of like, what are they going to do next today? And it became a hobby.
Yeah.
It was a hobby for about 5 years. My husband said, I'm traveling all over the world. And my husband said, you've been doing this for a long time. Why don't you do something with it? He had gone we lived in Cincinnati at the time, and had gone to the half price bookstore, and he comes home with it. I still have the book. I keep it for sentimental reasons. It's called How to Market Your Romance Novel. And it has, a Victorian couple on the cover, and it's totally self-done. And it had a lot of good stuff in it. So I'm like the engineer. I made a spreadsheet. What do I do? What do I do? And I did every step. And eventually through that process, it's so much different now, but I ended up with an agent, and I'm like, yeah, this is something. I went to my first writing conference and I thought, this is something I think I want to do. So I finished that first book. Actually, I wrote my first book 5 times.
Wow.
It wasn't even my first book. It was the first books were the ones I wrote for fun. When I realized this is something I might want to do, that first book I wrote 5 different times. And that was my learning book. So don't be discouraged, if the first doesn't gel for you, but you love the characters in it. I mean, it's your book. You can do what you want to with it, and just keep working on it, and be patient and don't give up, I guess, is the rah there. But it was true for me.
And I actually love the idea too, that there is something. I mean, I think, people think, oh, I'll write a book and make $1 million or whatever. And I think, the thing about writing, I mean, I think you can do a lot of jobs to make, to make money, right? Engineering, finance. I mean, I think you can show up and, do your best and earn a decent salary, or, a big salary or whatever. But I think to be a successful writer, it's so much more than that, right? You have to have this, it has to sort of be a passion that you can't ignore. And so the idea that you really are, and especially in the beginning, but I think through our whole careers, you are writing for yourself
Exactly.
first, right? You got to,
Well, I lost that. I didn't lose the engineering job. I left. And one of the reasons we left had to do with my husband and his mental health therapy job, because one of his clients tried to kill him. So that took me, I think took me 14 or 15 books. No, 16 or 17 books before I finally, it was the first book of my Cincinnati series, where I finally was able to take that experience and put it in a book. It was so traumatic for all of us. So we left Cincinnati because of that.
Yeah.
Because the guy was very threatening. You got 30 days for arson and attempted murder, and 30 days. And, and he was very threatening as they drag him off to prison. So we left Cincinnati. I got another job. And then 9/11 happened. The economy and I was laid off. And then I'm okay. So at that point, I think I was 35, 36, 37, somewhere in that area, not quite 40. And I'm like, what do I do with my life? Jobs in my field. I was very specialized at that point. Like, okay, now what do I do?
Right.
And you feel like, I'm not even 40, and my job is not obsolete, but really hard to find now. And so I went into business for myself. I'm still writing. I sold my first book right before I got laid off, like a month before. And so, okay, I'll write the second book. And then in the second book, this is like, fiction becoming true. My heroine had been a chemist and left her field again because of something that happened to her, and became a school teacher. I'm like, I always wanted to be a school teacher. And so I did. I was a school teacher for a bunch of years. And I continued writing full time until I was able, and with being, unfortunately, this is the truth, being a school teacher in Florida, you don't make that much money.
Right.
So by the
Or
time
anywhere. No,
or
no school teachers
anywhere,
make enough money. Right.
I know. And so by the time I could make enough, like if I could write one half of one more book a year, I
Mhm.
could make as much as being that's when I left teaching and wrote full time. But yeah, I wrote full time for, gosh, a bunch of years. You know, my first 6 books, I think was my 7th book was
You
supposed.
worked, yeah, you worked full time while you were writing for those years. And
Yes.
you had a daughter also. I mean, right? I mean, yeah, 2 kids. I mean, and that's very similar to me. I worked in finance and wrote in the evenings after the kids were in bed. I mean, sometimes look back at my now, 50-plus-year-old self and think, how the fuck did I do that? My God, it was so, I could never, I can't even imagine how we did it. But I think it goes to that passion, right? It goes to the fact that, you know, there's probably a lot more decent ways to make a living than putting the gamble and the time into this writing career. But when you love it, right? When you love it as much as you love it, you
Yeah.
can't let go. You got to do it, right?
I think we've all had the people that come, like the family member who will come and say, that looks pretty easy. I've got a 2-week vacation coming up. Maybe I'll write a book. And then I'll be like, yeah, you do
Me
that.
too. I'm
You
like,
do
write a
that.
book. I love that. I
How
keep
simple
saying to
it
my
must be.
husband, you should write a book. Babe, write a book. I'd love to read it. I mean, I think that's right. I mean, it looks very glamorous. Until you see, that we are in our pajamas, all day, and you sit at I mean, you have very prolific. It sounds like you're really good at being very prolific, with your words. But there have to be days too when you sit there and sort of you think that, nothing happens, and you're like, oh my God, what
Absolutely.
happened?
I mean, I'm about to start on my 30th book.
That's
And
amazing.
I mean, and I know friends who've written 60, 80, 100 books. And I'm like,
Right.
mine are long. So I don't want to do it.
Right.
I'm like
I've
a
really
real
written that many.
slacker with my
Right.
friends.
That's right. Let's talk about page count. Then we can compare pages. No, but of course, everybody does it differently. And your books are, and they're very substantial. There's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of twists. This is not, and I'm not diminishing the books that are, the sort of the sweeter, shorter.
Those are hard to write.
Yeah, I know. I
Very
run
hard
long
to write.
too.
My hat goes off to someone who can pull together a tight, concise book in a few pages. It's really a gift.
I agree. I agree.
But
But there's so much good digging, into character here.
then going back to the 30 books, there's a period, with the exception of, I mean, Cold-Blooded Liar, like I said, it was one of the gifts that flew like, just like with water.
Mm-hmm.
But there are so many where I'm like, how did I ever think I could make a living doing this? I can't
Mm-hmm.
write anymore. It's either too many people talking in my head, or they've all gone on strike and they don't want to say anything to me, and I can't figure out what to do next, or the words simply won't come. There's a lot of days like that, and you just have to push through it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's part of the job. And writing is a job. It's a job for which you have a passion. And for those of us lucky enough to do it, it's a wonderful job. I mean, I can't think of a job where you influence and can touch so many lives of people you've never met and probably will never meet. I mean,
Right.
it's a beautiful thing. And hearing from readers, I cherish all of those messages, like, the abused wives who've escaped their husbands, and I've read your book, and that was me, and you get these wonderful messages, and that is a beautiful thing. But there are also days where you're just like, I never want to do this again. And
Mm-hmm.
again, I think it's a normal human thing. We're still human.
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah, it is difficult, but you just have to push through it, and you can push through it. And one more point that nobody really talks about, again, for all of you as aspiring writers or struggling writers out there who are women of a certain age, a difference. It does. The first time I kind of got that I don't know how many people experience it, but I used to get these mind wipes
Yeah,
where
like
everything went
totally.
quiet. It's terrifying. When you've had people, it sounds like we're crazy, but when you've had, characters chattering in your head all this time and then it goes quiet and it's just white noise in your
Yeah.
head,
Yeah.
that's scary. So I had a
Yeah.
mentor at the time, and she's a wonderful woman. And I called her in a panic. And she said, well, first of all, calm down. How old are you?
Yeah.
Told her,
Right.
okay, this is what you need to do. And she said, it will come back. It will come back differently, but it will come back. And she was absolutely right. So you also have to be flexible to the needs of, of your changing body, your changing
Yeah.
brain, the
Yeah.
changing society around you. And you just have to be flexible enough to get through that. Like the palm tree in a hurricane is the one tree that, because it bends, it doesn't
Hmm.
crack. And we
Yeah.
just have to have that kind of flexibility.
And I think that it changes anyway. I mean, I know for sure it feels different, as we get older, but I think it's, you kind of expect it's not like making a widget where every time you start, you're like, oh yeah, I know how to do this. This will work exactly the same way the last 10 did. It is sort of, and I think, I talked to Sandra Brown, who was she's so lovely, but she was so candid about the fact that every time she starts a new book, she's just feels this incredible fear that she won't be able to do it. That she's like, I don't know how I did this the last, whatever, 87 times. And I have no idea how I'm going to do it again. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that is so interesting and so true as well.
Yeah. And hearing that for me, I mean, I'm like, oh, okay. Somebody else has,
Right.
I'm not alone. You're not
Yeah.
alone,
No.
and it's we're such a solitary, it's such an isolated kind of career. It's easy
Yes.
to feel like you're all alone and nobody else has this problem.
Right.
But when the big girls like Sandra Brown have the problem, it's it's something you can say, okay, I'm going to cut myself some slack. I'm going to take a
Yeah.
deep breath, and I'm
Yeah.
going to come back at this again tomorrow, and it's going to be, it's going to be a better day. And
Right.
you have to push through that and realize that, again, it always comes back to the characters. You're writing the story because you fell in love with the characters. So when you find yourself in that deep well of, I can't do this anymore, you step back and say, why did I love to do this to begin with? Because of
Right.
these two people, and I want them to have a happy ending. And by goodness, they are going to have a happy ending no matter what it takes.
And it's a good point because I think when you're stuck, like sometimes if you're stuck on a plot point too, we're so used to thinking about it like, well, this has to happen and this we have to get to, but it almost, I think sometimes backing up and getting back into sort of the character part, what is she feeling, thinking, reacting, and walking away, and doing something, I don't know about you, but if I do something physical, like I weed the garden or I fold laundry or do dishes or something that doesn't require my brain. Those are moments sometimes when I'm like, I'm just sort of like having a conversation with this character who it seems like she's not really obeying me, but of course that's never how it works anyway. And I find like she says, well, I have to do this thing. And then I'm like, of course you have to do that thing. So then you sort of solve the plot problem is less a plot problem than me not understanding the character.
Exactly. That happens a lot. It
Yeah.
really does. And then you're like, oh, and then angels sing, and
Right.
until the next time you hit a snag, and it just over and
Yeah.
over again. But as writers, I think we're very hard on ourselves, and I think we need to, me included. And I have a husband who's like, this happened in the last book. It did, and he's like, oh, okay, good.
Right, right,
But
right.
yeah, that blinking cursor for me, how did I ever do this before? And it's like,
Right.
well, okay, so I've got a character who's, I don't know, a doctor. What do I know about being a doctor? How did I ever think I could write a book about a doctor? I have a lot of self-doubt. And again,
Yeah.
that's why I start with those character profiles, because I get to know the people. And then once I get to know the people, I lose myself in the people, and I
Yeah.
forget I forget to be afraid.
And you also forget that they're coming from you. It's like suddenly you're having a conversation with somebody else and you're like, "Oh, this person's so smart and so interesting and all I'm doing is listening to them and not acknowledging that the them is also me, that it's all sort of coming from the same place. But I think there's something to the fear, like, and I think this is why I think I appreciated hearing it from Sandra and from people like you who are so successful, is that I think it makes us good. Like, I think if we weren't afraid, if we were just like, hey, I got this, then I don't think the books would be as good as they are. I think we have to have the fear because it drives us to work harder and be better.
Well, I think that's true. I wish it weren't, but I
I
think it's
know,
true.
right?
We'd really kind of like to not have the fear, but thanks a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks for all that anxiety, damn it. Yeah. Yeah. And then
ultimately it will work. And sometimes it works better than other times. And again, flexibility, and it's both cutting yourself some slack and putting your posterior section in the chair every day. I mean, or not every day. I don't write every day, but
yeah, but as often as you can.
Right.
Yeah. And then the other thing you've talked a lot about, which I think we have to acknowledge, is those community, right? I mean, husbands are fabulous, children are fabulous, but the community of people who do what you do every day, who know what it's like to be stuck, to be scared, to get rejections, and all of those things. Those are the people that say, "Oh, come on, Karen, you can, how to do this. This is just a blip." And help you find your way back, because it is so solitary, and you can't really write. I mean, people write, I know, they collaborate on books, but when you're actually writing, you are on your own.
You really are. I have a very good friend who is, because I'll be, oh, this book has got me stuck and I don't know what to do next. And she'll say, well, then call me and talk it out. And I know she's playing solitaire on the other end. I know she is, but she goes, and which is fine, because all I need is, I don't really talk to myself, but if I'm talking to another person,
right,
I get energy from that. I'm like, oh, well, this could happen. And this, oh, and now this has to happen. And she'll go,
I love it. She's like your backboard. You're not even, she's not doing right. And that's exactly what you need. I completely understand that. And sometimes I have, I'll have a friend who's not a writer who'll try to interject and be like, well, what about this? But really what you need is just to have somebody who's like, oh yeah, that's because it's you figuring it out, because it's you, it's all you.
Yeah, it really is. It is all you, but you draw from so many people.
Yeah.
And, and it's and I'm grateful. I'm so grateful for the people around me. It's I often think, could I do it on my own? Probably.
Yeah.
But could I do it as well on my own, or would it be easier on my own? I don't think so. And I draw energy from people. When I was working in corporate America, I found that I got my best work done when I was I would just get out of, I was staring at something at my desk and like, I can't think about this anymore. I get up and I go talk to somebody and we'd figure it out.
Yeah,
it would be that collaboration, that mental collaboration. So find somebody in your life that you trust who will support you perfectly. Because you always have people too that'll say, either they try to make it their own book if they're a writer. And I think I'm guilty of that. I have a friend who writes comedy. And I'm like, and then they could discover a dead body. And she's like, Karen, this is my book, not yours. This is a comedy.
No dead bodies. Sorry. Right.
But find somebody who is supportive and truly supportive. And sometimes we'll do, and sometimes that's what you need.
Yeah, I think that is such good advice. All of that is such good advice. Well, okay, so this is so exciting. So we have this book, and it is coming out February. Tell me again. I can't remember now.
February 28th in the US. And that's a really beautiful cover, I think.
It's a fabulous cover. I love this cover. And I'm getting a glare on it, but it is so gorgeous.
It looks like a beach cocktail.
It does. It looks like a beautiful beach cocktail, but it's not a beautiful beach cocktail. It's got that dark red in the middle, which is trouble. And then my dog is snoring. I don't know if you can hear. So you have this one coming out in February, and this podcast will launch right in it'll come out the Thursday after this book is out. So it'll be right here. So super excited, and then everyone will get the chance to listen to you talk right after they've bought the book. But tell me, then you have another book, a new New Orleans book also coming out this year?
Yeah, my
Okay.
second New Orleans book comes out in probably August. They're usually August
Okay.
books. And that's
Okay.
called, I think I can say what it's called now. It's called Beneath Dark Waters. And it's the same group of private investigators in New Orleans, Burke Broussard's investigations. So it's another
I
one
love it.
of his people. Yeah. And I've kind of fallen in love with that whole crew as well. And it's
Isn't
New
that
Orleans.
fun when you love them? It's fun when you love them. That's why I love a series, is because you just get to go home a little bit to the people that you do adore. Well, I'm super impressed that you're on to 2 books a year. I'm gonna grow up to be like you, I hope. But in the meantime, this is such a fabulous book, and Cold-Blooded Liar. And actually, we will offer a free copy of this. Somebody will win a copy of this when the podcast airs, and I will be in touch with your publisher about getting me a final copy for the giveaway. We'll publicize it everywhere. Karen, so fun to talk to you. Thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom and your stories, and helping us, who are aspiring and struggling, and reminding us that this is all just part of the process, and you're so good at what you do.
Thank you. And I've just been blessed because there were a lot of people who gave me a hand up, and who still do, and I'm just grateful. I'm grateful for the author community.
Yes.
Kind of pay it forward. So if anything I've said today helps, I'm glad.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I have to imagine it helped me. I love to hear these stories, and I'm 17 books in, so you'd think I would know enough, but it never hurts to hear it. I really appreciate it. So, everybody joining us today, this was Killer Women Podcast with Karen Rose, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.